When my son first told me he had met someone special, I could see the light in his eyes. It was the kind of excitement only love can bring. That pure, unguarded joy that makes a mother's heart swell with pride and relief. After years of watching him work hard, struggle through heartbreaks, and focus on building his future, I thought, finally, he's found the one. When he brought her home for the first time, I remember how polite and graceful she was. She carried herself with a sweetness that instantly drew me in. Her smile felt genuine, her words gentle, and the way she looked at my son, or at least how I thought she looked at him, made me believe she truly loved him. From that day on, she slowly became a part of our family. She'd come over on weekends, help me in the kitchen, and talk about the future she wanted to build with my son. She spoke about family values, about loyalty, and about how she wanted to take care of him the way I had. I used to smile quietly, thinking how lucky he was to have found a woman who saw the same goodness in him that I always had. There was a calm comfort in those days, a sense that everything was finally falling into place. I watched the way my husband would laugh at her jokes during dinner, how my son would look at her like she was his entire world, and I'd feel this warmth inside me, that feeling of a mother who has done her job well. I thought my family was complete. It's funny how we create these little pictures of perfection in our heads, how we convince ourselves that everything is as it should be simply because we want it to be that way. She had a way of fitting in so easily. My husband would often compliment her on how respectful she was, how she reminded him of the old-fashioned kind of young woman, humble, polite, grounded. I never thought much of it after all. It was rare to meet someone with such manners these days. Sometimes she'd stay late helping me clean up after dinner, asking questions about my marriage, about how we'd kept our love strong for so many years. I'd laugh softly, thinking it was just admiration, that she wanted to learn how to build a happy family of her own. There were times she'd offer to run errands for us or stop by even when my son wasn't around. I took it as kindness. She'd bring me flowers or some small treat, saying she just wanted to check in. It made me adore her even more. I thought she saw me as a second mother, someone she could look up to. Looking back now, I wonder if that was the moment she was weaving herself deeper into our lives, not out of love for my son, but for reasons I couldn't yet imagine. At that time, though, I was just a proud mother. I remember sitting one evening with my husband, watching my son and her laugh in the living room, and I whispered to him, "She's the one. He's finally found his person." He smiled and squeezed my hand, and for a moment everything felt so right, so beautifully right, that I didn't notice the flicker of something else in his eyes, something I wouldn't understand until much later. It's strange how life can look perfect from the outside while cracks begin to form quietly underneath. But in those days, I didn't see the cracks. I saw love. I saw family. I saw a future that I thought was safe. I believed she loved my son with all her heart, and that belief was the foundation I stood on. I never realized how easily love can be faked and how blind a mother's hope can make her, because in my heart I truly thought she loved my son. Looking back now, I realized there were signs, little quiet moments that didn't make sense at the time, but whispered the truth I refused to hear. I think when you love your family, when you believe so deeply in the goodness of the people around you, you train yourself not to see the shadows. You tell yourself that small things don't matter, that love and trust can cover up anything. But the truth is, sometimes it's the small things that speak the loudest. I remember one evening when my son had to work late. His fiancée still came by for dinner. She said she didn't want to eat alone, and of course, I welcomed her in. My husband seemed unusually happy to see her. They laughed a little more than usual, shared inside jokes I didn't understand, but I brushed it off. She had that charm about her, the kind that made people comfortable, made everything seem innocent. Still, I caught myself watching them a little too long that night, wondering why something in my chest felt off. Then there were the phone calls. Sometimes she'd call our home number when my son wasn't around, saying she wanted to check if he'd left something at the house. I'd hand the phone to my husband, and he'd talk to her for a while before giving it back. They'd laugh, and when I'd ask what was so funny, he'd say, "Oh, just a silly joke about dinner." I smiled, trusting it was nothing more. After all, why would I ever doubt them? She started helping my husband with little things, fixing the computer, helping him pick out gifts, even asking him for advice about men. I thought it was sweet that she respected him, that maybe she saw in him a father figure she could depend on. I never realized those conversations were building something far more dangerous than respect. There were small gestures, too. The way she touched his arm lightly when she laughed, how her eyes lingered on him when she thought no one noticed. Once or twice I caught it, but I told myself I was imagining things. I didn't want to believe my instincts. There was a day she came over when I wasn't feeling well. I remember lying down and hearing their voices in the kitchen, low, quiet, and close. When I got up, they quickly changed the topic. My husband smiled like nothing was wrong, and she busied herself making tea for me. I told myself they were just being considerate, that maybe they didn't want to disturb me with something trivial. I convinced myself to stop overthinking. It's strange how we do that, how we silence our own intuition because facing the truth feels scarier than believing the lie. Even my son noticed her growing closeness to my husband once. He laughed about it, saying, "Dad and she get along so well, that's a good sign, right?" And I nodded because what else could I do? I didn't want to plant seeds of doubt in his mind when I wasn't sure what I was seeing. I didn't want to ruin what seemed like happiness over something I couldn't explain. As time went on, I found myself watching her more carefully, but every time she smiled at me, every time she called me Mom, I'd feel guilty for doubting her. I'd remind myself of all the good she'd done, the dinners she helped cook, the laughter she brought into the house, the love she seemed to give my son. I told myself no woman who smiled that gently could carry a secret that cruel. But deep down, a quiet voice had already begun to whisper, "Something isn't right." And though I tried to ignore it, that voice grew louder with every passing day, until eventually I couldn't silence it anymore. That day is etched in my memory like a scar that will never fade. It started like any other quiet afternoon. The house was still, sunlight spilling softly across the living room floor, and I remember feeling oddly at peace. My son had gone out of town for a short work trip, and his fiancée had told me she'd be spending the weekend with her family. My husband said he was stepping out to run errands, nothing unusual, nothing suspicious, everything appeared normal, and maybe that's what made what came next so devastating. I had gone to the market earlier that morning and realized I'd left my wallet in my husband's car. I called him a few times, but he didn't answer. I thought maybe he'd just stopped somewhere and forgot his phone in the car. It wasn't unusual for him to do that. But as the hours passed, something inside me began to twist. That quiet, anxious feeling you can't explain but can't ignore either. So I decided to take a short walk, clear my head, and maybe find him if he was nearby. As I walked past the cafe on the corner, I froze. Through the window, I saw them, my husband sitting across from her, my son's fiancée. For a second, my mind tried to make sense of it, tried to give it an innocent reason. Maybe they had run into each other by chance. Maybe they were planning something for my son, a surprise, an event, something sweet. But as I stood there, the way they looked at each other told me everything. It wasn't a casual look. It wasn't friendly. It was intimate, too familiar, too soft, too wrong. I wanted to move, to turn away, but my feet wouldn't obey. I just stood there, staring, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might crack my ribs. Then she reached across the table and he took her hand, gently, the way a man holds someone he's deeply connected to. And in that moment, the world around me seemed to vanish. The sounds of the street disappeared. The laughter from inside the cafe turned into a dull hum. I could see only them, the betrayal sitting right before my eyes. I remember the way he smiled at her, a smile I hadn't seen in years. She leaned in close, whispering something that made him laugh. And for the first time, I saw her face not as the woman who was supposed to marry my son, but as someone entirely different. Someone I didn't know at all. The girl I had welcomed into my home, trusted with my son's heart, had been sitting there with my husband as if the world belonged to them. I don't remember how long I stood there. I think I wanted to scream, to burst through that door, to demand an explanation, but I couldn't move. My whole body felt heavy, frozen between disbelief and pain. My mind kept repeating one thought. "No, this can't be real." Yet every glance, every smile, every quiet gesture between them made it painfully clear that it was. When they finally stood up to leave, I turned away before they could see me. I walked home, numb, unable to feel the ground beneath my feet. I didn't cry right away. The shock was too deep for tears. It wasn't until I reached the door, the same door she had walked through countless times, pretending to be my future daughter-in-law, that the first tear finally fell. I sat in the silence of that house, realizing everything I thought I knew had just shattered in front of me. I had lost a daughter I never truly had, and a husband I thought I still knew. And in that single, cruel afternoon, my whole world stopped making sense. When I walked back into the house that day, the silence felt heavier than it ever had before. It was the kind of silence that settles in your chest, not around you, the kind that makes you feel like the air itself has turned against you. I sat down in the same chair I had used every evening to watch my family laugh together, and suddenly even the walls felt like they were watching me, holding the echoes of every lie that had been spoken beneath that roof. I didn't know what to feel first, anger, grief, or shame. They all came rushing in at once, tangled together so tightly I couldn't separate them. I kept seeing their faces in my mind. My husband's gentle smile, her soft laugh, the way he used to look at me when we were younger flashed against the way he looked at her in that cafe. It tore through me. I wanted to believe there was a reason, something that made sense, something that could make this betrayal feel less cruel. But there was no logic to it. There was only pain. It wasn't just the betrayal of a marriage. It was the betrayal of trust between a mother, a wife, and the people she loved most. The hardest part was thinking about my son. Every time his name crossed my mind, my stomach turned. I thought of his happiness, of the excitement in his voice when he'd talk about her. How could I ever tell him what I had seen? How could I destroy his heart when mine was already in pieces? I found myself pacing the living room, whispering questions into the air. Why? How long? What did I do wrong? As if the walls could somehow answer me. At night, I couldn't sleep. I would lie there next to my husband, pretending I didn't know. Every breath he took felt like a reminder of the secret he was hiding. Sometimes he'd roll over and put his arm around me, just like he used to, and it made me sick. How could someone hold you with such warmth and still carry such deceit in their heart? I'd stare at the ceiling and wonder how long he had been living this double life, how many times he had smiled in my face after being with her. I thought about confronting her too, looking her in the eyes and asking her how she could do this to my family. But then I'd remember the way she used to call me Mom, the way she'd hug me before leaving the house, and I couldn't bear it. I had loved her, truly loved her, like my own daughter. That's what made it so unbearable. The betrayal didn't come from strangers. It came from inside my home, from people I had trusted completely. There were moments I wanted to scream, to throw something, to let the anger consume me. But then there were moments where I just sat quietly and cried until I couldn't anymore. Grief is strange. It doesn't move in straight lines. One minute you're furious, the next you're heartbroken, and sometimes you just feel empty. That emptiness was the worst part. It hollowed me out until I barely recognized myself. I started avoiding mirrors because every time I looked into one, I saw a woman who had been made a fool of, someone who believed too deeply, forgave too easily, and trusted too blindly. And yet, beneath all that pain, something inside me still loved them both. That's what hurt the most. Love doesn't just disappear, even when it's betrayed. It lingers, heavy and stubborn, long after it should be gone. And in those long, sleepless nights, I realized that my heart wasn't just broken. It was fighting itself, torn between anger and the impossible. Wish that none of it had ever happened. For days after that moment, I lived in silence, trapped between two unbearable choices, to speak or to stay quiet. Every morning, I'd wake up and see my son's face in old pictures around the house, smiling, full of hope, completely unaware that the woman he loved was betraying him with his own father. The thought tore me apart. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't even look at either of them without feeling my throat tighten. Every conversation felt heavy with the words I wanted to say but couldn't bring myself to. I'd stand in the kitchen, stirring tea I had no intention of drinking, and think about what would happen if I told him. I could already see it, the disbelief in his eyes, the heartbreak, the anger. I knew it would destroy him. He adored her, trusted her the way I had once trusted my husband, and the idea of being the one to shatter that illusion felt unbearable. But then, every time my husband walked through the door pretending nothing had happened, something inside me burned. How could he act so normal? How could she still come around, smiling like she hadn't taken everything sacred from us? I tried convincing myself that maybe it was just a moment of weakness, a mistake, something that could be forgotten. I told myself that if I stayed silent, maybe it would stop. Maybe they would realize the horror of what they'd done and put an end to it. But deep down, I knew better. Secrets like that don't disappear. They grow, they rot, and they poison everything around them. Still, I hesitated. Because once the truth was spoken, there would be no going back. One evening, I heard my son on the phone with her. He was laughing, talking about their wedding plans, about how lucky he was to have found her. I sat in the next room, my hands trembling as I listened to his joy. That was the moment I felt my chest tighten with a kind of pain I didn't know existed, a mother's heartbreak mixed with guilt, because no matter what she had done, I knew that the truth coming from me would destroy not only his relationship, but his faith in love, in family, in everything he believed in. Later that night, my husband came home. He sat down at the table, asked if I was okay, and when I looked at him, I saw a man I didn't recognize anymore. There was no shame in his eyes, no guilt, just tiredness, maybe even a little fear, but not remorse. That made my decision even harder, because when someone you've loved for decades shows you they're capable of betraying not only you, but your child, the ground beneath you stops feeling safe. I thought about confronting her privately. I even rehearsed it in my head a dozen times, the calm tone I'd use, the words I'd choose to make her understand the pain she'd caused. But then I'd imagine her denying it, twisting it, making me look crazy, and I'd lose my courage. I felt trapped, surrounded by lies and bound by the fear of breaking my son's heart. The days turned into weeks, and each one felt heavier than the last. I carried the secret like a weight pressing down on my chest, suffocating me from the inside. I started realizing that silence wasn't protecting my son. It was protecting them, my husband and her. Every day I stayed quiet, I became a part of their lie. I was letting them continue their deceit under the roof of my own home, while my son remained blissfully unaware. One night, as I sat alone in the dark, I finally understood something. The truth hurts, but lies destroy. And no matter how much it broke me, I couldn't keep letting this poison spread through my family. I had to choose pain now, or let it consume us all later. When the truth finally came out, it didn't come gently. It never does. It exploded, like a storm that had been waiting just behind the clouds, patient, but inevitable. I didn't plan the moment, it just happened. Words that had been buried in my chest for weeks spilled out one night when I couldn't bear the lies any longer. My son stood there, his face drained of color, unable to understand what I was saying at first. Then realization hit him, and I saw the world collapse in his eyes the same way it had in mine. There are no words for that kind of silence, the silence that follows a heart breaking in real time. He didn't cry right away, he just sat down, staring at nothing, as if trying to rewrite reality in his head. I wanted to hold him, to tell him it would be okay, but how could I promise something I no longer believed in? My husband tried to speak, to explain, but no words could justify what he had done. And she, the woman my son had planned to marry, stood there frozen, her eyes darting between us, knowing there was no escape from what she had built. That moment was the death of everything we once called family. In the days that followed, the house felt colder than ever. My son moved out, my husband barely spoke. The air was heavy with memories that didn't belong to us anymore, and I was left to pick through the ruins, to gather what little strength I had left and figure out how to live in a world that no longer made sense. I kept replaying everything in my mind, searching for the point where I could have stopped it, wondering if I'd failed as a wife or as a mother. But no matter how many times I went over it, the truth stayed the same. Their choices were their own. I was not the one who broke us. For a while, I lived in bitterness. Every time I saw a happy couple, it stung. Every time I heard laughter that reminded me of my family's, it ached. I told myself I'd never forgive them, and maybe I haven't, not fully. But I also learned something in that pain, something about strength, and about what it means to rebuild when everything inside you feels shattered. I learned that forgiveness isn't about letting them off the hook. It's about freeing yourself from the weight of their betrayal, because carrying that anger only keeps you tied to the moment that broke you. It took time, but slowly, I began to find myself again. I started doing small things, morning walks, quiet dinners alone, writing down my thoughts instead of swallowing them. I began to see the woman I used to be before the lies, before the heartbreak. A woman who had given her family everything she had, and still had something left to give herself. And I realized that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you can become the start of something better, not because it's easy, but because it forces you to grow stronger than you ever thought you could. I don't look at love the same way anymore. I understand now that love isn't about blind trust or endless giving. It's about honesty, respect, and courage. And when those things are gone, love alone isn't enough to hold anything together. My son, he's healing too, slowly. It's been painful, but he's learning, just like I am, that broken hearts can still keep beating. What happened to us changed everything, but it didn't end us. It just stripped away the illusions and left behind the truth. And as painful as that truth was, it set me free.